All right, hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's gardening program. I'm Lorraine Mappa, Programming Coordinator for Loudoun County Public Library, and it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Nancy Berlin. Nancy has a graduate certificate in natural resources from Virginia Tech, was a natural resource specialist with Virginia Cooperative Extension, and is currently owner of Gentle Landscaping in Manassas. Tonight, she's going to give us some ideas for container gardening using native plants. Welcome, Nancy.
Thanks. It's great to be here. And I'm really touched that you're inside listening to me on a beautiful night like this. But I think we'll be done in time so that you can go out and water your plants or do a little weeding afterwards and just enjoy this beautiful day. So the reason I developed this presentation was because a lot of people do container gardening because it's convenient. You don't have to bend over quite so much. You can adjust the height. You can adjust the nutrients very well. Um, but I thought, why not do that with native plants to get the advantage of having an ecosystem right on your patio or on your balcony? And that was further brought home to me when one of my volunteers in Prince William County came to me and said that she wanted to certify her balcony as an Audubon at home sanctuary. And so we got together and she counted all the species. She had plenty of species to be qualified for that honor, including hummingbirds and all different butterflies, and just by putting native plants out. So that was the impetus for me to further study this program about 10 years ago. So thank you for joining me. Let's get started. Let's see. So I'm going to define what a native plant is, and I'm sorry if you guys are experts on this part already, but I feel like I need to cover it. The plants in this presentation were chosen because they're local to Northern Virginia, with the exception of Echinacea, which is not a Northern Virginia native, but it is a gateway flower that opens up all sorts of possibilities for people who aren't familiar with natives. And sources for the local ecotype plants from this ecosystem, can be found at Plant Nova Native's website. That's a great resource. Or Ursanga has a wonderful native plant compendium that you can do some searching for the plant that will fit your needs better. So that's, that applies to containers or not. So I'm going to talk about cultivars, and I'm going to define that and resources in the presentation. And I'm going to ask that you purchase plants based on the Latin name. And I know that's intimidating, but you know what? Nobody can correct how you say it because Latin is not a spoken language. So you can say, clematis, clematis, I don't care what you say. Or you can just write it down on a piece of paper and show the people at the garden center. Don't be intimidated by the Latin names, but it does help you to pick the right plant, to be specific, because common names are very confusing. So common names, I can't remember why I went into the room. Sometimes I can remember the Latin binomials that Linnaeus used better than I can remember, my passwords or why I walked into the room to get something. So again, I don't want you to feel intimidated by the Latin names. I'm using them so that I can be careful about what I'm recommending. And so if you see something you like, you could snap a picture. I think this is being recorded, so you can watch it again and again and take some notes later. So I'm going to suggest that you plan your containers to provide nectar, and that's called nectar flow. Beekeepers call it that. Provide some cover and provide host plants and a scattered bloom time. So maybe you'd have one or two containers with native plants in them, and you can you can make that last, midsummer into fall. This is a Plant Nova Natives bloom table, and when I do a landscape consultation with a homeowner, I always provide them with a bloom table for the plants I'm recommending, because I feel like that they can anticipate then what color it's going to be, about when it's going to bloom. It can tell you about the health of the plant, but also, for aesthetic purposes, certainly. So Penn State has some wonderful pollinator trials. And so some plants are not created equal. Many of the plants that we see at big box stores or gardens or even some garden centers are not all that attractive to pollinators, to butterflies, to our beneficial insects, and to birds. And so picking the right native plants is really important. So there's several entities that are studying this in depth to see which native plants are the most beneficial. Earth Sanga's website, they're in Springfield. They have a wonderful compendium that talks about this. This Penn State, they made a chart. Mount Cuba in Delaware has done some excellent research. They're a public garden, a foundation, and they do excellent research on native plants. And I always picture these grad students going out and sitting on a stool right next to the plants and counting how many insect visitors have come to each plant and the diversity of those insect visitors and how often they come. And so it does give us some glimpse into how valuable certain plants are. But for a closer look, you can go to Penn State's Bees, Bugs, and Blooms and read more to your heart's content. So there are native plants and there are cultivars and there are things called nativars and there are things called straight species. And people throw these words around and it's kind of intimidating, but I want you to know right off the bat what these mean so that you aren't intimidated or confused at all. So the general rule of thumb is when in doubt, you should choose a straight species. And if you know the plant yarrow, you know that yarrow looks ferny and it has a stalky plant. And the straight species that has not been changed genetically at all has a white flower on it. And the flower blooms, in May, June, July. It's a wonderful native plant. But then there are cultivars of that. And a cultivar is just indicated by two quotation marks on either side of a fancy name. So the straight species of yarrow is Achillea millefolium, and the cultivar is Achillea millefolium paprika. And that's to catch your attention, to sell more plants, and to tell you that color is probably red. Okay? But when in doubt, it's best to choose a straight species. And often you're not going to find these at a regular garden center or a big box store, but a native plant nursery, the straight species. And it's not possible for me to generalize that a cultivar is better or worse. And that's where the research at these universities and Mount Cuba can tell you whether a cultivar has been changed to be more disease resistant, have a different color. For example, Symphenotrichum oblongifolium, and that's just aromatic asters. They're a fall blooming plant. Well, October skies, which is a cultivar, it's been changed slightly genetically, and it was substantially better at attracting pollinators than the straight species, but that usually isn't the rule. Okay. A cultivar can also be changed to be more disease or pest resistant. And I'll show you another example of that. So the more hybridized generally, the less genetic diversity and the less resiliency. Okay, so that's why I say if you can pick something that's like Achillea millefolium without the fancy name on the end, you're more likely to attract more pollinators in general. So choose a reputable source before you choose a cultivar. And Doug Tallamy has some good information on that. Penn State, University of Vermont. You can call your master gardener desk and they can help you do the research. But choose a reputable source. Doug Tallamy has found that when you change leaf color, that does change the chemical composition of the leaf, and that makes it maybe usually less attractive to the bird or the insect that's eating the leaf. They might not even recognize it as a leaf that they want to eat. So here's another example. Monarda fistulosa, that's just bee balm, okay? And the light purple one is Monarda fistulosa, the straight species. Doesn't have a fancy name behind it. But Monarda fistulosa, Claire Grace, the color's a little bit different. It's been bred to be powdery mildew resistant. And it attracts many pollinators. So that particular genetic change didn't affect its attractiveness. Some cultivars or some nativars, which are just cultivars of native plants, may be sterile though. I was a sucker and I got a purple cone flower, but it was orange and it was fragrant. And I got it and I put it in my front yard next to the purple coneflowers because I thought, well, those look pretty together. And I sat there and watched it one day, and the purple one was covered with pollinators visiting it, and the orange one had none. And my guess is that they had bred that so much that it became sterile. So it wasn't, those goldfinches never came and got those seeds because those seeds were not attractive to them. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me back up here. So Virginia Native Plant Society has a statement on cultivars, as do Department of Conservation, many entities. And so you will this is pretty much a summary of what you would read there. There are some disadvantages and advantages. So we've kind of covered most of these, but the advantages of the native species, the straight species, it's a host plant, it's food, it's adapted to the conditions. It helps biodiversity and genetic diversity. When seeds are produced through sexual reproduction, through pollination, you end up with a lot more genetic diversity than clones. Clones are just clones. It may be hard to find some of these straight species, though, sometimes, unless you go to a native plant vendor. Sometimes they're less predictable. They're a little wilder. There's snacks and homes for native insects in the stems. And the bloom time usually coordinates to when the insect needs it. When you start to change things, that's when it becomes different. Some of these are patented. Some of them are more disease resistant. They're very predictable size-wise. They're sometimes better behaved. They're profitable, and that is the reason that they're sold in so many of our retail establishments, and they're maybe easier to find. They're going to lack the genetic diversity, and they may be less adapted for hardiness, and they may be less valuable. So the bottom line is, if you can get just a species with just the binomials, the first two names in Latin, and not the fancy selling point, powwow or wowie zowie, something that is going to make somebody some money and is patented, that would be your better option. A little more light reading on nativars. These are by research-based institutions. Here's Mount Cuba's. You can go to Mount Cuba's and they have a whole section on monographs on their website with research. One whole section on phlox, one whole section on baptisia, one whole section on heucheras and sedges, and it's excellent work. So take advantage of that information. So now we're going to hit the container garden. It's what you really came for, but I had to say that stuff before we got started. So as with any gardening, right plant, right place is critically important. So analyze the space you have. Clean your container well. I would soak it in 1 to 10 bleach water. Clean it with a brush. Remove the mineral deposits on the outside and the inside, and get off to a clean start. It must have adequate drainage holes. I am continually finding beautiful pots for good prices in stores or farmers markets or all over the place, and they don't have any drainage holes at all. So I'm learning to use my drill to put some drainage holes in ceramic pots, which is a little dicey. I'm not real good at it yet, but I'm tired of finding these beautiful pots. It must have a lot of drainage holes. That's critically important. Choose the container based on the plant's needs. Okay, a plant that's out on my front stoop in the hot sun probably should not be black plastic because it's going to get super hot unless it's a plant that really likes that heat. A plant that needs a lot of water probably shouldn't go in a clay pot because the water evaporates through the clay. And more on this in a few minutes. Just believe me for right now. Do not use rocks, diapers, foam peanuts, anything in the bottom of your pot. I know that's not what you've been doing. And believe me, I spent years putting rocks in the bottom of my pot. But I will tell you about the research that points as to why this is a problem in a few minutes. So just hold that thought. Um, Remember that container gardens have a finite amount of nutrients. They depend on you. They use up that closed system of nutrients, so you will need to fertilize them. Native plants do not need fertilization as a general rule. They are suited for our soil, they are suited for our climate, they are suited for the conditions that we put them in. However, when you put it in a pot, you're changing those conditions and they use up the nutrients that are in that potting soil or whatever medium you're using. And more on media in a few minutes. Bring the porous containers in for the winter, or maybe take the plants out of the pot and put them in your landscape if you have that option. Remember to water the soil, not the plant. Keep the water off the leaves. And Lorraine was saying she was going to go out and water her plants. Watering in the morning is a good idea, and watering the soil, keeping the leaves as dry as possible to reduce the fungal load that could affect those leaves. But let's talk about soil, because you know what? It's depending on you. That plant is depending on you to provide a good base of soil, not only to anchor the plant, but to provide nutrients and drainage. And so a little bit more. So because we're talking about native plants, and this doesn't apply to other plants that are non-native, you don't want to use garden soil for other plants, but you can use 1 part garden soil for your native plants, 1 part coir or coconut fiber, 1 part perlite. That's 4 parts, isn't it? And 1 part like coarse builder sand. Don't use beach sand or play sand. Okay, remember though that garden soil can contain diseases, weeds, and insects, so you don't have to use garden soil. Now you'll notice there that I didn't mention peat because peat is a non-renewable, and I know that you care about that. Peat bogs take hundreds of years to develop over time, and we're depleting them by selling potting soil with peat in it. More and more garden centers are offering peat-free mixes, and I'll show you some examples. But peat is an amazing product, but because it's not renewable, I can't in good conscience recommend it to you. So your plants are dependent on a relatively small amount of growing medium. Make sure it's light and fluffy so that the roots can go through it. Some mixtures that are called soilless, like they have core and a lot of other things in it. Sometimes they're also on poor quality potting soil, could be ground up pallets. You know, people will sell about anything. So I would recommend that you take a look at what you're buying, smell it. I've had some that smelled like petroleum before when I got it home. So, you know, you're the customer and beware of what you're making sure you're buying. But some of these soilless mixes are hydrophobic. That means they actually repel water. And once you let them dry out, they won't rehydrate. So be careful the products that you use. Now, the garden professors are a controversial group from University of Washington, and they are very big on peer-reviewed research. So I will quote them, but they can be kind of feisty. So, but if you want to know more about soilless mixes and garden soil in containers, you can read more here at their garden professors, and then just put the search terms container planting. If I want a reputable source on the internet, you can always put containerplanting.edu or containerplanting.ext for extension. So peat is an organic mixture of mosses, reeds, and sedges that have been cooked together in those bogs for hundreds of years. And they sequester a lot of our Earth's carbon. And the soils they're found in are waterlogged soils. That's why they're used in potting mixes, because they hold water nicely. Peat moss usually means sphagnum moss, but destruction of these peat bogs is releasing greenhouse gases. So 1 centimeter of peat can take 10 years to form. So I'm going to recommend that you find a peat-free mix. So a good container soil, train your eye. It's a soil that provides roots with nutrients, air, and water. It's got to have space for air. That's why clay, clay is a very nutrient dense soil. It's an excellent soil. It just doesn't have enough air spaces. And so adding perlite, core, other ingredients can make those air holes bigger and allow those roots to go through. You want it to be disease and pest free. I would, you know, take out as many of the weed seeds that you can see. Of course, if you're going to use garden soil, you're not going to see most of those. So peat-free potting mix, what to use instead? There's lots of variety. Test the drainage of it. The water should drain through it, not, you know, not in 2 seconds, but, you know, over 5 to 10 minutes, it should drain pretty well and stay kind of moist. So compost, depending on the soil that you pick, there's a lot of variables. So use your critical thinking to take a look and see, make sure it drains. Perlite and builder sand, they let water through very easily. And then some of the core fibers can be hydrophobic. So you can test that by pouring water on it and seeing if it repels. So remember, good soil has a lot of airspace. So check garden centers and ask them to carry peat-free mixes, or ask them, what peat-free mixes do you have in stock? You can make or buy good quality compost to mix with that. And of course, compost varies depending on what nutrients you put in it. It's very unpredictable. But if you have a good soil that drains well, supports the plants, and the plants continue to look healthy, you're probably in good shape. A mixture that drains well and has enough hole for air, maybe 25% compost would be a good addition. So coconut coir can be a useful alternative, but it can be difficult to keep hydrated. So typically it's 4 to compost is 3 to 1 or 2 to 1. Maryland Extension, it can be reached at Maryland Grows. and they have a very good article online about peat-free mixes. So here's some soil ingredients that you sometimes see in the peat-free mixes, and it seems like I'm spending a lot of time on soil, but remember, your plants are depending on this. Here's some things that you need or not. Fertilizer, you will need to provide some kind of organic fertilizer. I would recommend with native plants that you use an organic fertilizer, something like fish emulsion or can't remember the name of that one. I'll think of it in a few minutes. But an organic fertilizer, not like Miracle-Gro. Usually micronutrients aren't necessary to be added, so don't get suckered into buying something that has all those micronutrients in it. Lime is probably already in the potting soil. Humus, only for plants that really like dry, drastic conditions. And compost, it depends on how good the compost is. I tend to use a product called Leaf Grow or Free State Farms in Manassas has some good products that tends to be leaf mold and in small amounts. Again, not renewable. Peat and sphagnum is not renewable, but coir can be substituted for peat. I would not recommend you use manure in your containers or forest products like sawmill waste. They may repel water. They may be toxic. No biosolids. They sell biosolids for your lawn. I wouldn't use that. Bark. I would not use that. If you have a lot of weed pressure in your containers, you can use some fines just sprinkled on top, but usually you don't need any bark. And fungal inoculants are very expensive. The mycorrhizal fungi, don't bother. Okay. If you use garden soil, those fungal and bacterial nutrients that the native plants need are already present. And most of the time the stuff on the shelf is definitely out of date anyway. So here's a few, and you can just be a good consumer. Read the label. These are just a few of the ones that are available, locally here. But I'm not promoting any of these, but I think they're all adequate. Okay, here's the no rocks at the bottom. Now you're gonna have to just believe me on this. Don't use rocks at the bottom because what happens is you create a perched water table. You think that by putting the rocks down the bottom that the water will drain below the rocks, but actually because of the way water molecules act, it perches above the rocks. So the roots are sitting right in that water. So it's counterintuitive. Again, you can read more. This Intuition versus Reality website by the garden professors explains more of the physics behind it, but water moving through a soil reaches a different substrate and it stops. And that's where your roots are. And then your roots begin to rot and you get fungal and sloughing of the roots. It takes the outside of the roots off. And so it doesn't drain well. This also happens when you plant a tree. So you should never plant a tree or shrub and put compost in the bottom of the hole because the same perched water table occurs. If you need to add compost when you're planting a tree, put compost in the whole huge bed that you're planting in and not just the hole. Okay, here's a little bit more about potting soil in case you haven't had enough. These are questions you ask yourself. Does it look okay? Does it smell okay? Is the particle size look okay? Fill it up and then tap it to let it settle and then pour water in it. And it should drain in 30 minutes. I'm not going to ask you to weigh all the pots and calculate the average weight. This is for the North Carolina State Substrate Laboratory. You can do this by just eyeballing it. Is it draining well? So they tested these soilless growing media just in case you wondered whether they're as good as peat. These are two plants that were compared at North Carolina State Substrate Laboratory. They study soil all day. And they grew these Gerbera daisies in a peat-free mix on the left and a peat perlite mix on the right. So I'm thinking that it looks darn good. It's a darn good comparison. But let's talk about maintaining your container gardens. In general, I came home today from pruning at somebody's house, and I noticed that my plants were all drooping. Well, you know what? I was drooping too by the end of the day. If it's drooping in the morning, it needs water, Lorraine, okay? If it's drooping in the afternoon, well, we're all drooping in the afternoon. Check the soil. If it's bone dry, give it some water. But most plants droop in the heat during the day, and then they recoup that at night. Choose your container based on the water needs. If it's clay, it's going to dry out quicker. Water the soil, not the plant. Keep the water off the leaves and allow it to dry out between waterings. Okay, don't continually saturate it unless it's something like a cardinal flower or a button bush, something that likes wet feet. The more roots, the more water. So if there's a lot of roots in the pot, you're going to have to monitor it a little bit closer. And new and young plants need more careful watching. I made some container gardens for my daughter, and I said, you know, and when it gets hot, you might have to water these twice a day. She said, twice a day? I'm not sure I could do that, Mom. But you know how brutally hot it gets in our summers. So move it to the shade, and you might need to water it more than once a day, depending on the plant and depending on the container. So there's aiming for the sweet spot is what you want. Sometimes a plant gets too wet, and sometimes it just drains just so fast that it dries out too fast. This plant on the left that has the droopy leaves, sometimes that can occur when you've got some root rot going on, and that can be the sign, and you think, wow, that needs water, and really the reverse is true. So use your finger, put your finger down below the surface and check it out. You know, you are an observant person, and you can tell what a plant needs just by being a good observer. So here's a little bit more about, so a plant will saturate, and then it drains, and then it reaches the capacity. Okay, these are all horticulture terms. And then it uses up that available water, which starts to evaporate, and then it gets to the wilting point. And if it gets to the permanent wilting point, it's too late. Okay, so you got to catch it before it gets to that permanent. And I've watered plants and had them start shaking because I think they're so excited to be getting water. But this just gives you an example. There is a point of no return. A little bit about fertilizers. With native plants, use or an organic fertilizer, not dry like for lawn and garden, for lawns. That's not the kind of fertilizer you want. You want slow release, could be effective, but it takes a lot of water because they have a hard shell on the outside, those little balls, and it takes a lot of water to dissolve that shell and get them to start working. I use water soluble a lot of times, like fish emulsion or the tone. See, plant tone or something like that. They're an organic product. So you're really giving it NP and K, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And usually a 10-5-5 or a 3-1-2 or similar ratio is what and follow the recommendations. And I usually, do it every couple weeks. But I watch my plant and see if it, is looking yellow. Okay, a little bit about choosing a container, and this is pretty fun. The size, you get better growth on with the roots if you have larger containers, but you can go to, if you put a tiny plant in a big container, it's going to have a hard time getting to all that water that's spread all around that area. So a larger root zone can support more roots and a more above ground growth, but you can pot them up in small containers and then move them to their final destination. Okay, there's a little bit more by the garden professors. If you want to read more about correct pot size, they have an article about that you can read. So types of containers, all different types. I've always wanted one of these troughs, but I haven't gotten one yet. But these bags I used last year, I had surgery and I got a whole bunch of grow bags, and they were very successful with native plants in them. And they don't dry out all that well. They're porous, but they're not too porous. Clay, ceramic, plastic, again, the clay evaporates quicker. Ceramic, if it's glazed, it holds water a little bit better. Plastic are pretty fun, but they hold water a little bit better. So, you reach your hand down in there and make sure it's not super wet down, in the middle toward the bottom. There's a lot of creative ideas for plants in containers. I like this on the right. I love those drain tiles with the succulents in them. I think that's pretty fun. But use your imagination. I know that gardeners have so many great ideas. They're some of the most wonderful people on the planet. So placement, be aware of microclimates. Up against the cement is pretty darn hot. It's getting not only the heat from the sun, but reflected heat. So watch the angle and watch the reflected heat. Remove the plant when you get it from its container and take a look at the roots. You can even ask permission to do this at a garden center. They should look white and healthy, and they should go throughout the median. They shouldn't be wrapped around, although, a lot of plants that I buy that are from garden centers that aren't native plant nurseries, a lot of times have roots that are circling that need to be cut. Remember, your container has to have drain holes, and know what the median is that you're going to put it in ahead of time. And remember, you're going to need a fertilizer. So when you're buying your plant, you may want to go ahead and get the soil and the fertilizer at the same time. So a little bit about design, and then we're going to look at some combinations of native plants, which is really what you came here for. Except for I had to say those other things first. So a little bit about design. The location is the most important thing. You've got to pick the right plant for the right place. And do you want a single species or do you want a mixture? What colors do you want? What height? And how much can you actually lift? That's becoming a bigger problem for me all the time. And the old fill, thrill, and spill, which I will show you in a few minutes. I'm sure you're familiar with that. The fill fills up the bowl of the container. The thrill is a spike in the middle, and the spill spills over the side. But do not feel that this is a commandment that you cannot break. This is something that, you can use all the creativity. It does not have to have fill, thrill, and spill. But if you want it to, this is what it looks like. So let's look at some colors. So we might want to pick analogous colors, colors that go together. So I've grouped these plants. Believe me, this has taken years for me to develop. What will grow in a pot that will bloom about the same time? Now you can't hold me to this because you know how the weather is around here. But these bloom in the spring. In fact, they're all blooming in my yard right now. So I could take the plants in my yard, and this top one on the right is a golden ragwort. or Pachyra aria. And then there's the columbine, that's the native columbine, Aquilegia canadensis, and Zizia aria, or golden Alexander. And I think these would make a really bold, nice spring. But you know what? Next week we're heading into some other kinds of weather, and these are going to be fading. So I have other combinations to show you. Some other analogous colors for spring: beard tongue, Penstemon digitalis, iris cristata, crested iris, or dicentra, and this is the native bleeding heart, or the native geranium, maculatum. So those provide you cool analogous colors. Remember the complementary colors from your color wheels, and those always make a bold statement. I really love red and purple together too. I mean, there are just certain combinations that make me sing, you know. So I like this combination, and these are spring bloomers. They're both blooming in my yard right now: Sezincrium, or blue-eyed grass, and Zizia, or golden Alexander. Complementary colors like this carex, it's a sedge, and it could fill the pot in nicely with feathery grass-like that move with the wind a little bit, and this Lilium superbum, which is a native lily. So I'm going to show you some other combinations for fun, and they're going to have a code on them so that if you snap a picture of it or you go back and look at it, if it has this raindrop on it, it requires moist conditions. So we wouldn't want to put this in a clay pot. This symbol will need full sun, 6 hours or more. It may need that irrigation twice a day though, so count the cost. And this is partial sun, less than 6 hours. Okay. So this one's shade. So I've grouped these by season for the most part. There's a few strays in here, but for the most part, for full sun in the spring, which is right now, I think that even though today felt like summer, we're still in spring. So this is a combination. Here's that yarrow, that native yarrow, Achillea millefolium, and that's what the flower looks like. And Sezincrium angustifolium, or the blue-eyed grass, and the Zizia. So this is a super easy combination, super sturdy plants, easy to grow, easily found at garden centers or native plant nurseries. There's another combination for spring. There's that columbine, that Aquilegia canadensis, that iris cristata, and there's that sedge again, and there's the little flowers that appear on it. Here's another combination for spring, and this could be for sun or partial sun. The golden ragwort, Pachyra aria. Penstemon, oh, there's the Pachyra aria buds. Get a little purple in there. And then beard tongue, or Penstemon digitalis. And here's the native strawberry, which is very underused and makes a beautiful ground cover, or would look lovely in a pot. We put some in front of a library at in Montclair in Prince William County, and it has been very successful. So here's another combination for partial sun, and this is spring, so these are all blooming now. They'll bloom for another couple weeks. The Phlox variegata, partial sun, or the woodland phlox, and there's that native bleeding heart. The crested iris, Iris cristata. And here's foam flower, or tiarilla. Penstemon digitalis again. And there's that geranium maculatum. And I think this is actually a cultivar because it's a little pinker than the native straight species. Another combination, there's that foam flower again, Tiarilla cordifolia. These would all work well together for spring. There's that yarrow again, and there's that phlox. So let's talk about early summer, which is just around the corner. Full to partial sun, early summer. Again, those Aquilegia are still blooming. And if we put them with the Spigelia, or trying to remember the common name for I can't remember the common name for that. Just remember Spigelia. They are gorgeous. And Coreopsis verticillata. And there's that sedge. You could fill the pot up with that. I just love that combination. Very dramatic. So another one for summer. This is an annual. It's partridge pea, and it's easily grown, and it gets little pea pods on it. And there's a yellow butterfly that matches those petals exactly, that comes around and lays its eggs on that. With the Rebeckia hirta or Rebeckia fulgida, the black-eyed Susan or the orange coneflower, and then that butterfly weed, Asclepias tuberosa. Stay away from the tropical milkweeds. Pick the native butterfly weed, the orange and yellow one. There's some evidence that the tropical ones breed disease for monarchs. So here's some suggestions for full sun midsummer. Liatris baccata, wow, blazing star is the common name, and Rebeckia fulgida. Easy combination. You could go and get that at the garden center tomorrow and put that in, and it would be blooming in probably by June. I like this combination, kind of autumny, but it's in the midsummer. We've got yarrow at the top corner, and this is sneezeweed, Helenium flexosum, and this is a panicum, ornamental native grass, but that's just the Shenandoah cultivar with the orange. Toward the end of June, it would start to turn that color, and then the Rebeckia. And I really like this combination. It's not shown in a container, but this is Muhlenberger capillaris, pink muley grass, and this helianthus, this native sunflower. And this is a lowdown, a little shorter version that will, looks nice. So as soon as the pink clouds start to disappear, the yellow flowers kind of take over, so you don't see the ugly bottom of them. Another one, Rebeckia hirta, again, the black-eyed Susan, and then that pink grass, and then my favorite, yarrow. These are hot colors. There's that echinacea, and choose the straight species, Coreopsis verticillata, and then that butterfly weed, that Asclepias tuberosa for full sun. There's another combination, has a shrub in it, Calicarpa or American beautyberry. And then there's this sedge up here. It looks like seersucker, and it's called seersucker sedge is the common name. Carex plantaginea and the Coreopsis. That would be a very easy container, but you need a large pot for a shrub. Okay. New Jersey tea, a sedge and Coreopsis together for partial sun, full sun. And now we get to late summer, early fall. So there's the sneezeweed, the Helenium, Solidago, Nemorellus. There's a Solidago or goldenrod for every condition that you would want, a native plant. And then there's Symphenotrichum, October skies, the aromatic aster. That would make a fabulous fall combination. Here's another shrub, Virginia sweetspire or Atia virginica with, and there's the flowers on it. It blooms in the spring and then it turns red in the fall. And then you could fill the base of it with that sedge, that Pennsylvania sedge. Here's another one, Pygnanthemum, which is a mountain mint, and this Liatris, sorry, and Veronicastrum looks like a little ballet dancer to me. That beautiful combination of taller plants. And here you have the Muhlenbergia, again, the pink cloud of grasses with the echinacea, the coneflower, and Rebeckia. Another mountain mint with that would bloom beautifully in the fall with the New England aster. Okay, some ferns. You could do this in the spring with ferns in a moist spot. Another moist one, heuchera and coreopsis, and then this grass. Green and gold, and then this fern, marginal shield fern. This is very dramatic. I did one of these for my daughter. Here you see Impatiens capensis, or touch-me-nots, jewelweed with ostrich ferns. Super easy to grow both of those. There's a few other ones. Sumac. This is the fall bloom and the fall color, and you could put carex down the bottom. This is one I did for a friend, and she has it on her deck with the light hitting it really nice. It's a goat's beard, and a rosy sedge and a heuchera. I thought it made a nice combination. Her husband was not thrilled because it wasn't bright and flashy, but I think it's subtle and just absolutely beautiful for the shade. Another combination, and this is from the ISL plant website. I thought this made a nice combination of heuchera, Pennsylvania sedge. Here's another one that I tried last summer: wild basil and bottlebrush grass, and Monarda punctata, the spotted bee balm. Toward the end of summer, the Lobelia sylvatica, or the this is a blue cardinal flower, and the blue mist flower, and the carex. Some more grasses with a turtle head, Leone, and some carex or other sedges that bloom in the shade with some moss. Vines, you can put a trellis on or not. This is my favorite vine for a container. This is the native honeysuckle, the Nicera sempervirens, coral honeysuckle. And there's all sorts of ideas for trellises. And I like to make some of mine out of just scrap wood that I have. Single species, you can use any single species, which is simple. Fuzzy pink bean, or this is my favorite container plant for a single species. It's the native onion. And this is one I did this year. It just finished blooming, the wild hyacinth, and it needed some wet. I've recommended to clients that they put a witch hazel in a pot because it's a very small deciduous tree, and on a patio it can provide some shade. The American beautyberry would work in a pot, and you could cut it back to the ground every year. Yucca is a fabulous plant to have alone in a pot. It's very dramatic. And this I saw at a shopping center up in Fairfax, and these are horsetails, and they need to be kept wet, but it provides a really cool screen. This little tree, Atia virginica, little Henry, this is Virginia sweetspire, good fall color, nice bloom in the spring, and it does really well in a pot. Buttonbush needs a lot of water, but it's a food source for 2 of our sphinx mosses, and Sugar Shack is a small variety, just grows 3 to 4 feet. So planting for staggered blooms, you may want to go back and look at this list again later so that you can have something blooming on your patio at all times, so that you're always providing a nectar source. More staggered blooms. Winter interests, the red twig dogwood or the American hazelnut could be in a pot to provide that winter interest. Or the Ilex verticillata, it's a deciduous holly, and some cultivars are not attractive to birds. I would pick one that had normal sized berries, because sometimes the birds have a hard time actually getting the bigger berries in their mouth. So remember, the Audubon Society of Northern Virginia has a wildlife sanctuary program, that you can certify your balcony or your patio. And these are some of the sanctuary species that you can draw by using native plants. And then Homegrown National Park, there's container gardening advice on Doug Tallamy's Homegrown National Park website. So you can get more information there. And you can actually put your garden on his website. There's a lot of resources, so save these for your nighttime reading when you're not out enjoying your garden.